Hi, my name's Mike. Today we're going to be going over how to make a cross cut through a piece of wood with traditional hand tools. Knowing how to make a cross cut with hand tools is essential for being able to make successful projects. I've only been doing woodworking for about 8 years. It's just a hobby of mine. Um, some of the projects that I needed to make, some of the joinery that I was trying to get into these projects can't be made as easily with modern power tools. So I started looking into and teaching myself how to use traditional hand tools. So, like I said, we're going to be making a cross cut today. So I'm going to be going over the tools that we're going to need for doing that. I'm also going to go through the setup, how to get your wood ready to be able to make the cut, and then we'll actually be doing the cut. So, to move on, the tools that I'm going to be using this is a Japanese pool saw. This one's just a mass-produced one made by a company, obviously named Irwin. You can see on this one, it has two different size teeth on both sides. This side over here has got a more aggressive tooth. This is going to be for ripping cuts. And this side over here has got the smaller teeth, and they're a little offset. Both of them are pointing back towards your hands. So that's because this is a pull saw. So as you pull, it's going to be making most of the cut. As you push, it will be removing material, but the majority of the material is going to be removed on your back pull. That gives you a little bit more stability. As you can see, this blade is really thin. It's got a really small kerf on it, so you're not going to be taking a really thick cut. That's why you can get such precise cuts with it. I'm also going to be using this square, the speed square. It's set up for a 90-degree and a 45-degree mark, and the depth is adjustable, so you can not only use it for marking along the edge on a 90 or this way on a 45. You can also set different depths and then lock it in, so you can make repeatable marks on pieces of wood. We're also going to be using a chisel today. I'm picking this 1-inch chisel. That's what we're going to be using to be putting a knife wall into the material. And we're also going to be using a razor knife. This is what we'll be using for our marks on the wood. We'll also be cutting the surface fibers on this so we don't get any blowout on our cuts. And we're just going to be using this is just a piece of soft pine that came out of my scrap bin. Obviously, it has some holes in it, but that doesn't really matter. We're only going to be using the end up here because a cross cut is literally cutting across the fibers that are in the wood, whereas a rip cut is actually ripping down through the fibers. Okay, so the first step in making a cross cut is figuring out where you need to make it. So depending on how long you want your piece of wood, whatever you're going to be using this chunk of wood for, you'll take that measurement and you can set that measurement. So we're going to be doing it at 1.5 inches today. So we're going to set 1.5 inches on our square. So as you can see, it's graduated here in inches. So we're going to come back 1.5 inches, and I'm actually going to lock this in place right at 1.5 inches. I'm going to go ahead and take my square and put it against my wood in this manner here. Better put it this way so you can see it. So now I know that the end of this square is exactly 1.5 inches down from the leading edge of this board. So now I'm going to take and I'm going to open up my razor knife, and I'm going to set it down on a stable surface. And I'm just going to make a mark here right up against the edge of that. So now I know I've got a mark that is exactly 1.5 inches from the edge of here. Then I'm going to go ahead and slide my square out so it's longer than the thickness of the wood and lock it back in place. Now this is the reason we're going to be using a razor knife instead of a pencil. So as you can see, as the razor cuts down into the wood, there's actually an indentation. That's how we're going to produce what's called a knife wall. So I'm going to stick my knife right back in the beginning of that mark, and I'm going to slide the square right up against it. Again, making sure that I'm holding this perfectly across the edge to make sure that I've got a nice 90-degree angle here. Then, very lightly, I'm going to take my razor, put it right up against that, and I'm going to drag it across the top of the wood. Now, this is not only putting a visual mark there, but it's also cutting the surface fibers that are in this, so I'm not going to get blowout once it's there. Once you make a couple nice soft strokes through that, you can get rid of your square. Lay your knife back into the knife wall and lightly drag across it just to make that cut a little deeper and a little bit more pronounced. Now we're going to rotate our piece of wood over. Without adjusting my square, I'm going to put my knife right back in that notch, lay it up against here, make a mark again, a couple soft strokes across it, remove your square, and on smaller ones like this, you can actually just push your knife down into that. And you're literally just trying to cut the wood fibers that are in there. So now we've got a 90-degree angle across two sides of this board, and we're going to continue that. We're going to continue those cuts all the way around the board, just so we have a nice straight line completely square around the edge of our piece. So I'm going to continue that real quick. So now I've got this nice mark all the way around my board. Really shows me exactly where my blade is going to sit, but it's not going to do much more than that, but show me where my blade's going to sit. So that's where we get into that knife wall that I was talking about. And we move on to the third tool that we're going to be using, our chisel. So as you can see here, we've got a nice mark, and all I'm going to do is I'm going to take my chisel, I'm going to line it up just a little bit past that line. I'm going to bring it up, and I'm just going to dig in a little bit and pop that out. And then, as you can see, I've got a really nice wall there that I'm going to be able to put my saw blade up against. We're not going to have any tear out because the fibers are already cut, and that's going to help me hold my saw right up against that mark that we made. So now I'm just going to go ahead and continue that knife wall all the way around the board, just as I did. Just digging in softly, notching that out. And then I'll continue that on the other three sides. I went ahead and continued that knife wall all the way around this piece of wood here. So as you can see, I've got this nice square line that continues all the way across all four surfaces of the wood that I'm going to be cutting. So now we're going to move on to our next tool, and that again, of course, is that Japanese pool saw that I was talking about. And we're going to be using these smaller teeth because we're making a cross cut, and we're going to be cross cutting all the fibers that are on there. I'm just going to mount this in my vise here. And notice I don't have to have my wood square to where I'm cutting because I know what my angle is. So I'm just going to go ahead and clamp that in there. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the non-cutting surface of this blade and I'm going to put it right up against that knife wall that I had. That's going to act as a guide as I pull this saw through here. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my thumbnail and just press very slightly against the blade in that direction, just to hold it against that knife blade, that knife wall. And I'm just going to pull real soft right across there, looking at my piece and making sure that I'm cutting exactly square across the piece until I get this thing started and going. Now that I've got it started, I'm actually going to start my cut. And I'm going to be watching the blade on this side to make sure that it's traveling all the way down this knife cut. And I will still be holding pressure with my thumb and just being aware of where my blade is going as it's running down there until I get into this cut a few times and the blade will start riding in its own track and hold itself true. Again, I'm not putting a whole lot of pressure on this. It's a pretty light action. It doesn't take all that much for these pool saws to really start removing material. And I'm just keeping an eye on my knife wall on both sides of this piece of wood as I pull through. So now that I know that the track is right and the saw is running perfectly square, I can just go ahead and keep repeating the action and moving the saw back and forth. So now that I've got that cut made, you can see because of that knife wall, I've got a nice straight edge all the way across here, and there's no tear out on the wood. And I know that it's square, so we can actually take our square and put it back on the piece of wood here, and you can see that we made a nice square cut. So again, my name is Mike, and we just went over how to make a cross cut through a piece of wood using traditional hand tools like the Japanese pool saw, a 1-inch chisel, a razor knife, and a speed square for marking. I really enjoy woodworking, and hopefully you saw something here today that might want to get you into the hobby. Stay classy, San Diego.